All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call to order the Administrative Services Committee meeting to discuss redistricting and the three maps that we have presented to the council. The mayor's map, version 1 and version 2 that were presented by me, but helped to be put together by the citizens of the city. And also, if we have time to once again bring to the table the possibility of a racial polarization study. To start off today's presentation, so that we have true transparency here, I have asked members from the Southern Poverty Law Center to come here to discuss the maps that they helped put together. They have a professional map maker here today, Zach, and also with us today are two lawyers from the Southern Poverty Law Center that have been working very closely with the members of this community and myself and everyone else to get us to this point. So I'm going to ask that the first presentation, Jim, and I know you probably want to talk a little bit too about the maps and what you learned, that our first presentations come from the Southern Poverty Law Center as the way the maps are, what was changed, what was moved, and how much was moved. After further discussion this afternoon, we found that we are a block off, which is 125 people, which is less than 0.25%. So we're not talking about very much, which is an easy correction to be made. And when it comes to mapping and redistricting, so the map still stands as it is, as 53%. With a block correction. So what we'll do is we'll go into this discussion today and let Zach start off along with Liz and Jack. Okay. So again, a presentation from the Southern Poverty Law Center on redistricting and the possibility of maps in the city.
Pertaining to the redistricting effort going on in more review of what was developed ahead. So as a brief overview, we're going to hit on a couple of core things. The first is to address how these map changes were made. We're also going to go briefly over the reasons for these changes and also address some of the differences between our map and the map that has been proposed by the city. So how are these made? In terms of the software that's being utilized, we use geographic information systems in the form of magnitude. And basically, we were trying to draw a map that would address some of the community concerns pertaining to representation while making the most amount of minimal changes to the mayor's map. Initially, we were doing this based off of the PDF that was provided by the city. Eventually, we were able to get a shapefile to make some further corrections to make sure that the map complies as most with the city boundaries as humanly possible. The changes that are proposed are largely going to focus on changes between Districts 1 and District 7. So there is very minimal impact on the other districts in our first map. The second map makes some additional changes to address the population differences between the sizes of the districts, but otherwise these are very minimal changes. Our primary area of focus has been on Districts 1 and District 7. So what are the overall goals for what we're trying to do here? We're mostly focused on compliance with the Voting Rights Act, so trying to use the traditional redistricting criteria to kind of help us make and inform modifications to these maps to help address the community concerns pertaining to representation. So we've got these listed off here for those that are interested. It's issues like compactness, representing communities' interests, respect to the pre-existing political subdivisions and the incumbents in those areas. We want to make sure that the populations are as proportionally equal as possible in a federal context. When you're dealing with, say, congressional redistricting, this is plus or minus one person. When we get to a more local level, we're given a little bit more leeway with this process. And then we also try to preserve the core of the districts. I want to emphasize that last bit there. That's part of the reason why we are focusing on making minimal changes to the mayor's map. We are trying to make these cores stay as true as possible while still taking in community concerns and representation. Now, what are the big changes? What does this look like? You've got maps 1 and 2. Map 1 is mostly trying to focus on just unpacking District 1. So District 1, District 2, and District 3 are slightly overpacked when it comes to representation of African American population, but there is not a lot of easy ways to immediately make those changes while sticking with the mayor's map as a template. So making some changes between District 7 and District 1 make the most logical sense as a place to kind of divert this population and make sure that there is some equitable representation going on throughout the city. Map 2 tries to build off this a bit further and tries to address the fact that there are some population imbalances between the districts. So we're trying to make sure that the deviations come down a little bit. So instead of being plus or minus 5 or 6%, we get down to being closer to like plus or minus 2%, plus or minus 3%, making sure the districts are equally sized. Now, what do our maps accomplish? So both of them work to unpack District 1. We additionally were able to make some marginal improvements when it came to the compactness scores of these districts as well. Map 2 in particular, when we're focusing on trying to deal with population deviations, was able to make pretty significant improvements in this space, going from the mayor's template having a undercount in some districts of negative 1326 up to an overcount of 1304. We were able to get that down to plus or minus negative 981 or positive 721. So we're trying to compress it in that direction as well. Now I'm going to briefly go over the visuals. There are some easels here that also physically display the map. So if for some reason you're not able to see on the easel, we have these physical options here available as well. So this is the first map. So there's some very marginal changes, and I will get to the slide that shows that in just a second. We also have the measures of compactness score here. This is using a true color satellite image to give you an idea of what's underneath. Here's a map with some of the roadways, and then an additional map showing what the districts look like and where the changes are marked in a dark blue line. So you'll notice that there is a little bit going on in the northwest corner of 1 that is now moved over to 7, and then a little bit of the southeast corner that was previously in 7 has now been migrated and moved over into District 1. So these are the areas of change for this particular map. I also have some demographics here available as well. You'll notice at the bottom we've got the deviations. The greatest deviation was an undercount of negative 1416. So a slight change there in our efforts to try to unpack the district. But the overall high count still remained at 1304. As far as the African American representation, the mayor's map indicated that there might be a slight advantage, a slight overcount over 50%. Ours was able to nudge it ever so slightly higher to around 54%. I know there are some legal arguments that kind of undercut this. I will defer to my colleagues that are more informed on that matter than myself. I also have a list here of all the blocks. I apologize that the visual is not super obvious. I personally was not able to come up with a way to make them easily listed, but this is available if you need it as well. The secondary map we have here is still taking that mayor's map as a template, and we're just trying to further make some modifications to address that population deviation issue I raised earlier. So this is what that map in particular would look like. You'll notice that there are some differences. For example, District 4 had a slight area in the northeast corner that was kind of cutting in diagonally that's been moved a little bit to get more of a right angle. Additionally, parts of the southern end of 3 were kind of flattened out to kind of help make that a bit more flat and a bit easier to navigate and clear as well. Additionally, the areas between 7 and 1 were additionally moved a little bit further south, so instead of having this overarching arc, it's instead a flat line going across. It's a little bit easier to navigate for people to identify where they might be located. This is another rendition of it, just showing it here again with the roads underneath. And then this one here again shows the differences. The original map mayor provided in yellow, the undercut areas in blue. I will note that there is a slight deviation visually between 2 and 3. This is a result of limited capabilities inside the software where I'm not able to slice across a census block, but this is a block that is only impacting about 20 people. So we went with the visual rendition that was the least amount of impact, but it itself is still consistent with actually what the map is intended for the mayor. Just want to make that clear in case anyone got confused about it. Again, here is another chart going over the demographics. As mentioned earlier, we were able to kind of bring down the differences in size between districts down to negative 981 to positive 721. We were still able to keep the black representation inside of these districts still above the 50% threshold while still maintaining a reasonable population size between the different districts. Again, a list of all the blocks that were moved. Again, those going from 7 into 1, there was a lot more of them, so the list is a bit longer and a bit harder to see, unfortunately. I apologize about that, but again, if you need this list, I'm more than happy to provide it for you. And that is that. I've got some additional maps and slides on the side, but that is basically the overall rendition of the maps. Rob, anything you want to add?
Justin from Set Questions.
Guys, any questions on what you see?
Could y'all stand a little closer to the mic? We've got some old people here, and I'm one of them. Thank you.
Any questions on what we've seen? Looky, Gina, do you have any so far? Go ahead, man.
The numbers can I see your handout?
It's just the slides, but I'm happy to do those.
Yeah, the mayor's numbers and his plan are not matching the numbers in y'all's. I want to understand why that is.
Yeah, so we found the same thing, and I'm gonna let Zach speak to that. I think it is just a fact of different sort of data sets and software.
That's exactly it. So using the mayor shapefile, we went through it and we had the exact same blocks allocated to each of the districts in the original mayor shapefile, and we got different numbers. My personal theory on what's going on is there's likely a different version of the PL data set that is being utilized. Maptitude has one version. I know the city is utilizing one provided by Esri. The census has had a couple of revisions that have come out over a period of time. There was the initial wave and there was a couple of secondary waves that kind of came out. So my expectation or my personal theory of what's going on there is it's some slight differences between the data sets themselves, just as they've been released.
I have a question. Is that all right?
Well, look, can you write it down and get it to us up here, and if we can answer if we will, but we can take care of the council first, please, then any others.
Yeah, and then the obvious issue of drawing Mr. Penn out of his district, that's not reflected in these maps either.
Correct. So using the addresses that were provided by the city council's website, we were able to go and geocode. For District 1, unfortunately, it appears that the address that was on the website does not comply with the actual location of the in order to fix this, it's a matter of literally moving just two census blocks, very minor impact. It's less than 0.5%, so it's very minimal. Oh, yes. Do you want me to repeat the whole thing? I'm going to go with the whole thing. Okay, cool. So basically, as I was saying, the councilman's home, based on the address that was provided for the city council website, appears to be showing up slightly further south on the geocode than the actual location. The easy fix for this is moving just a block or two over to basically move it back into one, and it would be back in the district without any significant revisions to the proposed map.
Yeah. That was right.
I don't notice any difference from when it's on Maptitude, so I believe so.
Okay, any other questions? Ben?
No.
Gina?
Just a quick question on this. Since you have the mayor's map, surely you've seen the mayor's map and you saw where Mr. Pitt lived. It seems to me, and I'm not a professional mapper by any stretch of imagination, but it would seem to me that you would have looked at the mayor's map and had seen where his home address was and seen where that green star was. So it's odd that y'all didn't have the right address.
So we use the address that was provided on the
You have
website.
the mayor's map where the green star was, did you not look at his map?
So that map was
I'm
available
just asking.
online, and I'm having to like visually confirm where it is, because you can only zoom in so close, and then it stops displaying online. So I'm having to basically eyeball it to determine where it is. So based off of the geocode, that's the most accurate thing I could get at that time. Today was when I first heard about it.
I just want to emphasize that, this is why we're here today, to get feedback like this. Fortunately, this is a really easy fix. We've, been in conversation with folks in the community and doing our very best to develop a map in collaboration with members of the public and you all. And so this is exactly why we're here today. And
That's
we're,
fine, I was just curious,
Yeah,
because we can all see these maps and see where the stars are, and you where they live, and just wondering.
Well, just to reiterate the point here, we're talking about less than 0.25%, 100 people. So the disparity in the map still leaves it, once the line is corrected, at better than 53%. So the map is still viable, less 1 point. So,
Just have to
good.
read it. vote on something.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Corey?
No, I agree with Gina. I mean, my address is on the website, it's public. There's no way you use my address to draw the map. It's public. I mean, we had to do it when we ran for office. Even if you move the lines, so, or you know, that's another statement, like, okay, if you're gonna move the lines, just put me in, and then 5 houses down from me, the person not gonna be able to vote for me? Like, you know, I would definitely have to see some, you know, we can't just say, we're gonna move the lines. And then,
Everything's gonna be
and
okay.
then say if you move it to, you know, Stanford Street, that's 5 houses, the people 5 houses down, they're not gonna be able to vote for me. I think that's a major challenge. And I wonder, with any other council member, the rest of the 6, are they in that same challenge where even if you move the lines 5 houses down, that person won't be able to vote for them? So that would be my question.
Well, I'm gonna let them answer that, but I'm pretty sure that you just don't move a line and create a little sliver to move in. You would have to go along a track or a block, is that not correct? So the correction would be blocks and tracks and not just a street. So let's let them, before you get into the woods and make assumptions on what the map will look like, let's let these professionals make the corrections as they should be, and then let you take another look at it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Councilman, Mr. Chairman. Well, I have a response. Okay, based on this map right now, wherever they place me at in Voltaire right now, 5 houses down, that person would be able to vote. This is a neighborhood where they cutting through. So right now, my neighborhood is being cut through. So even if they place me right where they place me right now, and say my house was in the area that they have me presented, 5 houses down, the person wouldn't be able to vote for me, even with this current map. So even if it was placed like that. So the reason why my statement is that it's based on professional map makers, what they design. If it's placed right there, even in this current moment, that person will be able to vote for me in my neighborhood where I live. So that's the reason why I made that statement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Zach?
Okay, test. Okay, cool. So I certainly understand that issue, and that is one of the underlying challenges that comes with redistricting, is at a very top level, it's very hard to tell where some of these pre-existing communities are. We can certainly go through and try to make some additional adjustments so we're not splitting up an entire neighborhood. I don't think it will have significant impact on the community concern if we were to make that adjustment. So I think it would be doable. I would need to be able to run some tests just to make sure.
Yeah, what I think we'd like to see, because this obviously impacts Councilman Penn and myself, because I'm in 7, he's in 1, so it impacts our districts and right where he lives. Telling us you think you can do it, it only impacts this, a little bit of here and there. In order for us to vote on a map, we have to have one that is correct and that we have looked at. So what I think we would like to see, I don't want to speak for everybody, is if you can go back, make corrections, make sure that Councilman Penn is in District 1, show us exactly what that would look like. Because William's got to have something corrected to put on the agenda before we can vote on anything. We can't vote and say, well, it's only 125 people, it's only a line here, it's only a line there. So if y'all can do something like that and bring it back, I think that would help.
All right, any other questions? Any other questions from CJ, anybody else? What is over?
Hour.
All right, I've got a question. Whoever wrote me this question, I can't read it. Can you?
What is our realistic legal recourse if the council does not adopt one of these warfare maps?
Okay.
I wouldn't answer that.
Yeah.
Why
I
not?
think that's not necessarily for you to answer.
Well, what I'm about to say is that the Zodiac states that if there isn't 5 votes either way, one or the other, then the mayor's map becomes law. Now, what legal actions, I don't know. But The Zodiac states that if there's not 5 votes, one way or the other, for a valid map, then the mayor's map as presented becomes law. And
Just a clarification, when he says valid map, that means any valid map, not any specific one.
okay, any other questions? I'll take a few. I mean, we got a little bit of time. Jim, would you like to present something today too, or you?
Well, you know, we presented our map, so we were really here to see the presentation, but I did have just a couple of questions of Zach. Did you split any census tracts?
I do not know off the top of my head.
You do not know if you split census tracts?
No, so,
So you asked about census tracts or census blocks?
Blocks, tracts.
So I cannot split any blocks. I can split census tracts, I can split block groups, but the smallest unit that can be used is a census block, and those census blocks were split.
Is it, you know, the main thing we were coming to was to point out that Councilman Penn had been cut out of his district. But is it Southern Poverty Law's position that it's okay to split a neighborhood?
So, you know, the maps that we presented here today, we feel confident reflect communities of interest, and most importantly, increase the likelihood that these maps would comply with the Voting Rights Act. And so, communities of interest, as you know, it's a traditional redistricting principle. It's important, and it's one of many important factors.
So, I mean, I guess the answer is you are okay with splitting neighborhoods?
My answer is that I don't think that the maps as presented necessarily do that. There are always trade-offs when you're making maps. There are always principles and redistricting criteria that conflict with one another. And no map is perfect. But the maps that we have here today, we feel comfortable, provide adequate assurances that they would comply with the Voting Rights Act, Section 2, that they would comply with federal law, with the U.S. Constitution, and that they do a really good job satisfying the traditional redistricting criteria as well.
And did you consider equal protection clause?
The Equal Protection Clause, yes, we're confident that these maps comply with the U.S. Constitution.
I have a question, kind of a follow-up on that. Director Barber had mentioned community of interest and equal protection and those kinds of things, and splitting neighborhoods. I'm concerned about communities of interest and splitting neighborhoods, because I have a community of interest that is being split. I know you're talking about unpacking District 1, but you're also talking about moving a community of interest from one district into another, which also mitigates their voice as well. So, you know, community of interest is important, and, you know, they don't necessarily want their voice to be diminished either. So, when we're talking about this, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page here. Does the mayor's map abide by the Rights Act? Is it legal? Does it abide by the Voting Rights Act?
So, it's our assessment, and based on our analysis of the data and of the law, that there's a likelihood that the mayor's map wouldn't comply with the Voting Rights Act. Would not.
Why?
Because of, as we laid out in our letter back in February, we're concerned, and I'm not saying it's absolutely guaranteed to violate the Voting Rights Act, but we have some concerns that it could because of the dilution of black voting power.
Yeah, I'll just add that, as the councilmember Carroll said at the beginning, a racial polarization analysis is important to determine what numbers of black voters are necessary to elect candidates of choice. And that's part of the analysis of Section 2, or compliance with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. It's not just, oh, we have a majority, 50%, and we're good. There needs to be an analysis of what would be necessary to elect and what would allow for equal opportunity for black voters.
Well, since we got the mayor's map, I don't know, Director, do y'all have any sort of response to that? Is the greater than majority on the mayor's map?
No, we're not gonna respond. We've already made our efforts on 2.8. I think that they're in agreement that 2.8 would pass muster. And so what they're referring to is could a white voting block, voting as a block a preferred black candidate? And the answer is not in District 7. And I think they would have to agree with that.
I'm not sure, we would certainly be interested in the analysis that you performed to underlie, that assertion. We'd be glad to take a look and to work with you to come to a common understanding.
I'm interested to hear from the councilwoman about a neighborhood where their voice is mitigated if they're moved from one area to the other. How is their voice mitigated when each council member gives the concerns of every neighborhood that's in his or her district? How are they lessened in their needs in the community?
Well, that's what I'm concerned about happening, and I don't wanna see it happen. You have a community of interest, and they have issues of interest, like the Village of Spring Hill, they're all part of Spring Hill and the Village of Spring Hill. So I just wanna make sure that their voice is being the Village of Spring Hill, and their interests are not mitigated by moving them, or their vote is not diluted by moving them. So that's why I'm asking these questions, just to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Again, how would they be diminished if they're being equally heard by another councilman?
I didn't say they were, I am asking questions. I'm not debating with you, William, on this. I'm just asking questions about moving a specific block of voters into another district. Would that then mitigate their voice, dilute their vote if they are moved into another district? Same thing happening in District 1, is that we're kind of changing, going from residents of District 1, putting them in District 7 going into District 1. So I think we all need to just understand exactly what it means.
Any other questions from council members? All right, Lisa, do we have any other from the gallery? All right. We're at 30 minutes. Let's move on if there are any other questions. As a group, we've asked for a racial polarization study several times. Do we need to move forward with this racial polarization study? See that?
Well, I speak up, the community had asked for it several times. And, we're here to listen for the community, from understanding this will help resolve some issues and also help organization. So if we need to do it for organization, we might as well just go ahead and do it now.
Well, Joe and I had sponsored studies some time ago.
Sponsor
Joe and I sponsored the racial polarization study some time ago that failed, so.
I think that day we didn't have enough votes to pass it. I think you and Corey were missing, so we missed, I think it failed, 3-2? If that's fair. So if so, then let's get it back on the agenda. Corey, go ahead.
Now, I agree with CJ. I think we need to do a polarization study. I stated that before. This redistricting is very important and vital, and we need to do it right. It's gonna affect our city and community for 10 years. And, looking at the maps, I wanna make sure that the community, we do it correctly. And so I believe we need to have the polarization study done.
All right. Anything else from the gallery?
I've got something here.
Yeah.
Yeah, these maps are just not clear to me. Is there a way to get the clarity? Like, I wanna see a map, like the overlay you did that had what the changes were. I wanna see that at this quality. So I can know, okay, this neighborhood moved over here, and this area moved over there. And I can tell the difference, because right now I have trouble seeing what the changes are. I just have to look at the numbers, but I don't know from the neighborhood impact what the real impact is. So if y'all have the ability to provide something with this sort of clarity, boy, it'll be helpful.
I think we
Yeah, sure, and I certainly understand that interest. It's hard to make everything visible on a computer screen. We've provided you all with both the shapefile and the block equivalency file, so you can do all the zooming in you want. But that said, we can produce whatever images would be most helpful to try to sort of clarify what's up there. And so, you know, we're happy to work with you all to do that.
So as it stands right now, for me, if this, the way it appeared on our agenda, and it was on our agenda next week, there'd be no way I could vote for it, because I don't know what I'm voting for. So in order to get me a better understanding, it would be very helpful. At this level of clarity, I mean, it looks great, the level of clarity, just want to know what the changes actually are, so.
Yeah, good to see like an overlay sort of thing.
Yeah, you know, just a line going around it, let's change it.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Zach, did you said you the one that did the map, right?
That is correct.
Okay, with help of,
I took some community feedback.
okay, all right.
Some just quick thoughts. On the city website, all of our addresses, let's make sure we get the right addresses for where we live on the city websites, because evidently if people are looking for information about us and our city and where we live, let's make sure that everybody's address is correct on our website and we're providing the public with the correct information to start. Seems like we've got some incorrect information out there as a city when we're giving it to the people that we actually represent. Secondly, today is a very informative meeting, and I see that we have maybe a few corrections to make. I guess we'll go from version 2.1 to 2.2. The mayor went from 2.1 to 2.8, so we'll go from 2.1 to 2.2 and get another rendition out after our first presentation to the public, and go forward with additional presentations as we go through this process and get closer. Again, I think I have some type of support here to put the racial polarization back on the agenda, and I think I have another question from the gallery here, but seeing that we have that support, I'll suggest that we put the racial polarization study back on the agenda.
We can just,
So
we can just pull up the one we had.
it fails, so it has to
Well,
have,
we just have to
no,
bring it back.
it fails, so it has to have another number and everything else that's actually.
Basically the same one.
Right. Lisa, you have another question?
Yes. The question is asking the mayor's team to explain and break down their process while creating the mayor's map.
That's a Jim response. He's asking, the question asks is, what was your process in developing the districts and how you developed them? And I think y'all have answered that once before.
Yeah, I think we've answered it quite a few times, but trying to keep the district lines as intact as possible, understanding there's a migration of population from east to west. And so reapportioning those different districts was the first step. And then we worked with each one of the counselors within their respective districts, because some were gaining neighborhoods, some were losing neighborhoods because of that migration and reapportionment, to correct those lines. And to Councilwoman Gregory's point, there were neighborhoods that they wanted to keep more so than others. And so, you know, trying to work with them as that, but trying to keep the population or the district boundaries as in shape as possible, because those were the people that actually voted for the councilman.
And just to piggyback on that, initially with like map 2, 1 or whatever we started with, what was the black voting age majority of that? Was it like 49 or 40 something along those lines percent?
I would have
Did it
to,
increase?
I think when we started off, it was 46. You're talking about District 7?
Yeah.
It was 46, I think, and then we kept moving it up. You know, we also need to be looking at the data from Zach and Southern Poverty Law, because they are not consistent with the data that we're pulling. And so I'm dealing strictly with black voting age, white voting age, all of that seems to be out of sync, and that needs to be reconciled as well. Not just the boundaries of Councilman Penn's boundaries, but the data itself is different.
The black voting age majority in the city is what?
49.6.
And so we moved District 7 up to nearly 51% black voting age majority.
That's correct.
But it didn't start out that high, it was lower.
That's correct.
Actually, the first rendition given to the press was higher than that.
But we don't have that.
Matter of fact, I've got a copy of a text message sent to me by an individual. I'm not gonna make that public now, But that number went down once there was communication with an individual from the numbers that the press had. Those numbers that the press had were totally different in their reporting than the numbers that the council got the next day. And I don't know how we got there, but those numbers they were reporting were totally different. So however we got there, whether there was a correction in between 2.1 and 2.2 when the council got it, but those numbers were different.
So the numbers are even different today when you compare Southern Party laws to ours. And so there were no earlier renderings or any maps released prior to 2.3 to the media. So there were some early data sets, I think, that people looked at and that probably were released. But even today, like I was just saying, is we need to be able to reconcile our census blocks with their census blocks. We need to reconcile how they're calculating black voting age and black population, because they are different than ours.
And we all got a chance to go through the maps and look at the lines, and we worked with each other, because I know some we knew we had to move and some we wanted to move, and so we all had a chance to look at the lines and make moves and switch neighborhoods, you know, before we came out with the final version here. So we've all been involved in it.
So 2.8, when we finally submitted that, after quite a bit of community engagement and engaging each one of the counselors, I think everybody would agree that every counselor is actually okay with their district at this point, which was important to us, was to get that kind of consensus.
Well, in the end, no matter how it's stated, we have a community that's asking us to do more than what we have given. And the community is asking us to get to a point to where there is a sustainable fourth district. And as drawn, right now, we don't have a fourth district that is sustainable. At the percentages that there are, it doesn't work for what the community is saying, and it doesn't work for what other experts are saying, not just in the state of Alabama, but in other parts of the country that are used to doing this professionally. So I'm asking again that we correct, or that this percentage is corrected with the correct blocks and tracks, so that I can make that correction on the map that was presented and get it represented and corrected. And I'm also asking that as we go forward, that the administration remember that I'm not looking at myself, because if you look at the maps that they provided, District 2 was taken from 62% down to 59%. So I'm not looking out for a personal interest here. I'm looking out for the best interest for what the people in the city are asking for. And I hope that we're all doing that as we go forward, because it sounds like they're asking us for something totally different than what we're providing.
Well, I believe we had District 2 down to about 59% as well, Mr. Carroll, but working with you on your neighborhoods, we were able to put it back up. And so, and again, every one of them, as those new iterations came up, it was, when we first did the reapportionment, we did it without city council input. So the neighborhoods that we balanced population with, some of them were special to the councilors, and then we had to be mindful of not cutting anybody out of their district. But as we worked with you on those neighborhoods that you either had to give up or obtain, we were able to achieve 2.8. And I go back to, as far as voter polarization study, going back to the Voting Rights Act, and you got Southern Poverty Law here, if you look at District 7 on the map 2.8, the mayor's map, the idea here is that can a white population voting as a block stop a preferred black candidate? The answer is no, not when you achieve over 50%, and I think they'll have to concede to that.
There is no magic number or threshold under the Voting Rights Act that will guarantee that black voters will have an equal opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. It depends very specifically on the locality that you're looking at and on racial polarization. And from everything that we understand about the intensely racially polarized voting in Alabama, including in Mobile, it's our position that a District 7 with a VVAP closer to the ones presented in our map is more likely to comply with the Voting Rights Act, is more likely to give black voters an equal opportunity to participate in the political process and elect candidates of their choice. I appreciate all the work that you've put into your map, and that's why when we present these, we've tried to hew really closely to the boundaries that you've devised and that you've developed, making only really slight changes. And it's just those modest changes that go a really great distance toward increasing that likelihood that these maps comply with the Voting Rights Act.
Zach, could you provide us, because I do want to reconcile why there's a difference between our demographic data and your demographic data. And so if you could get us what you're using so that we can get it to our GIS department, I'd like to reconcile that as well.
Quite gladly, because as I mentioned earlier, I believe y'all are using Esri, we're working off of Magnitude. I believe, again, the difference is some version of the PL data set, I think it's like 74.91, something like that. So I think it's possibly just a issue of like either the vendors we're working through or potentially a just slightly different version of the census data itself.
Ben?
All right, we have one.
You have a statement too?
This is unrelated.
I just want to emphasize that, these differences we're talking about are really slight, but the fact that they make a big difference is really an indication that the District 7 on the mayor's map, may be coming really close to a risky area, right, of violating the Voting Rights Act, and indeed that's our concern. And that's why in the maps that are proposed here that were developed by members of the community, there was that extra assurance, right, of compliance with the Voting Rights Act. We may not be able to reconcile, we may be able to identify the source of the differences in those data sets. We may not be able to pinpoint, say this one's accurate and that one's inaccurate. They're just potentially different data sets. But that just emphasizes the need for having the assurances that these community maps provide about District 7 and its ability to perform and to be an effective black voting age majority for black voters in that district.
Yeah, I guess one other question, does it not concern you to have these little fingers shooting off into another district?
Again, these maps are nearly identical to the mayor's map. It was our intention to keep them as very close as possible, and in fact, our maps score a little better on certain of the compactness measures. So, in that way, no. No, there are three sort of recognized measures, statistical measures of compactness.
I know, but it's in the way you did it, the way they did it, I know you disagree, so we leave it at that.
Well, no.
No.
Let's find out.
Right.
No, let's find out what's accurate.
You work for the degree of measure that was used by both the city and by the Southern Harbor Law Center are both equally fair. But I believe one has a little more detail than the other when it comes to the legalization of what we're talking about here. So when both entities speak, they're speaking to the best of their knowledge and ability. So that for one to say one is stronger than the other one right now, then, who's to say? But if I had to bet a quarter, then I would think that the advantage would go in a different direction at this point in time. Ben has one question. There are a couple that are coming forward from the gallery.
All right, this really goes back to when you come back again, when you see it all. This sheet that we were provided by the administration, it breaks down the sort of the existing priority redistricting, so where the city stands, and then the redistricting plan. But it also has the categories of black, white, and other. So that we can actually do a comparison. Because I was looking at, if we're looking at, say, packing for District 6, if it's packed or not, there's really no way to know without doing the math, figuring out that. So if y'all could improve that, that'd be great too. To just sort of mirror this.
I don't think District 6 had any changes whatsoever, did it? I'm talking
Yeah, it
about
does,
in
it does,
version-
it does right there,
in
in
version
the
one.
second version 2.
So in version 1, no changes. Version 2, there are some slight changes.
I was just using that 6 as an example. It would be good to be able to compare.
Absolutely, we're happy to try to present the data in the most useful way possible. I also want to, recognize that we've provided you with the shapefile and the block equivalency file, so you have the most specific version of the data possible, and so you can sort of run any analyses that you want. We're happy to work with you to do that, but just so that you know, that capability is yours as well.
The shapefiles we give to the administration, right? Our shapefiles, our data, lists, mix it up and see what we come up with. Lisa, there were a couple of questions.
Is the mayor's map not in compliance?
Hang on a second. Say again, Chris.
The council doesn't have any staff really, other than me and the clerk. They don't have computer guys, they don't have map guys, they don't have any way to take that data and really do anything. Somebody else.
Understood, and so we're happy to do that. I just wanted to emphasize that, we're being fully transparent with all of this data, and our goal is just to make it useful and usable to you.
Question is the mayor's map not in compliance due to the census data corrections?
Is it not in compliance due to?
Census data corrections.
So, sorry, I'll just keep the microphone on. I'm not sure I'm understanding the question correctly, but we have laid out some concerns about the possibility that the mayor's map could violate Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act because it could have the potential to dilute black voting strength, to deny black voters in Mobile the equal opportunity to participate in the political process and elect candidates of their choice. We've laid out the test under a U.S. Supreme Court case called Thornburg v. Jingles, which is a test that has been applied for decades to determine whether a redistricting plan complies with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. We've laid out some reasons why we're concerned that the mayor's plan wouldn't comply, and have tried to demonstrate some reasons why we think the maps that are presented here have a greater chance of complying.
What is the position of each council member on the mayor's map?
I think that may be a little unfair at this point in time. I have to, Lisa,
Okay.
don't
Will
ask for an answer.
Will a new mayor's map be created due to the census updates?
That's a question for Jim. They're asking, will a new mayor's map be provided based on the new census data updates from 2020?
Yeah, I mean, there's really nothing that we can do as an administration to change anything, once we submitted it to you in the form of an ordinance by the deadline. So it is completely in council hands at this point.
So the answer to the question that if there's a supermajority approval of adjustments made based on updated census tracts and information, then yes, it could be done. But if there's not, then it cannot be done. The mayor has placed the ordinance in our hand. Now, to be honest, the administration could ask for a friendly amendment to their ordinance. And if they ask for a friendly amendment to their ordinance, the council may or may not accept it, but I wanted to behoove that the council may accept a friendly amendment to your ordinance when it comes to these adjustments.
Is Maptitude considered a gold standard on political map making versus, is it ESRI? E-S-R-I? Which is a general purpose GIS platform?
I'm not really gonna comment on the, what's the best way to phrase this? I don't want to be seen as endorsing one particular product over another. I will say that both are considered to be highly respected software platforms. Both are, yeah, that's probably as much as I can say without getting into like the realm of product.
Good. All right, we've been here basically almost an hour. I have some feedback from the committee. One is that the address block and track where Councilman Penn needs to be adjusted to correct his residence based on what we have. The second action item is the administration, and whoever does our website needs to address our proper addresses on where we live immediately. Because other people use this information to do such things as this. And when we ask people to help us do work, if our information isn't correct for the rest of the world to see, then we're providing false information out there. So whoever does our website, we need to get that corrected also. Thirdly, the last action item is that it seems to request that it be changed. Go ahead, Chris, I'm not, request that.
That was a request, wasn't it?
Right, that was a request, right, that the information be changed, yes, on our website, yes. We need to request that be done immediately, so all of our addresses are absolutely correct. And third, the biggest thing is that it seems as if there's consensus on the racial polarization study moving forward with that. So we need to get that ordinance back up and on the agenda so we can have that work done.
One more thing before we close. I don't know what a racial polarization study is, so I'd like to know what that is, you know, how it's useful, and that can be part of the debate and discussion, but I don't know that particular.
Well, I'll tell you what, we have a couple lawyers over here that really do racial polarization study, and it just so happened that Jack in the back, that is what he does, so let's hear from Jack.
Yeah, so racial polarization study essentially measures the political cohesiveness of black voters, the political cohesiveness of white voters, and the likelihood that, and what percentages those racial groups vote in the case of black voters similarly, in the case of white voters similarly, in the case of black versus white voters vote differently, and using past election data, usually is usually performed by looking at precinct results of election returns and making statistical assumptions based on precinct level results. There is statisticians can estimate with usually a high degree of confidence approximately how cohesive the various racial groups are, and therefore can deduce approximately what percentage black voting age population, which is the number we're really, the percentage we're talking about, what percentage black voting age population is necessary for black voters to be able to elect if you can't switch choice.
And just to step back to talk about why it's so important, the case I mentioned, Thornburg v. Jingles, that outlines the test for identifying a violation of Section 2. There are 3 preconditions to finding a violation of Section 2. First, you have to look to see if there is a black population that's sufficiently large and geographically compact such that they could constitute an additional majority black district or majority minority district on a potential or hypothetical or illustrative redistricting plan. The second precondition is whether black voters tend to vote in the same way for the same candidates. And then the third precondition is whether white voters tend to vote the same way for this candidates of their choice, and that though that white voter cohesion or white bloc voting tends, in the absence of a black voting age majority, to defeat the candidate preferred by black voters. So in essence, those second and third Jingles preconditions go to this core issue of racially polarized voting.
How do you know how people vote though? Because you
So-
don't like, I don't tell people who I vote for.
Yeah, so that's what a statistician or a racially polarized voting expert does. And one of the ways they do it is by looking at the precinct election returns. So at the precinct level, they're generally the racial data, the composition of the voters who voted at the precinct is known. And so if you have, say, and then you have the election results known at the precinct level. So if you have a precinct with 90% black voters that's voting very strongly one particular way, and then you have white majority, or say 90%, a precinct of 90% white voting age, white voters that's voting very strongly the other way. You kind of look at those, you can look at those precincts that are homogeneous precincts or ones that are on the extremes as not, as kind of homogeneous precincts, and you can also look at essentially amalgamating a statistician and often using a computer program, amalgamating those various precincts, possibly all of the precincts based on racial data and based on election returns, and then it's above my pay grade to actually do that analysis, but that's essentially the gist of how it's performed.
These methods are very well established, they're repeatedly recognized and credited by courts. Courts look at them very carefully. In fact, a recent court case, an panel of 3 judges evaluating racially polarized voting in Alabama found that it was intensely racially polarized, and that in fact the issue wasn't really seriously in dispute between the 2 parties. And so it would be incredibly surprising if a racial polarization study here found that there was not a high degree of racial polarization in voting.
Good, Mr. Chairman.
Councilman,
What do we have over here?
Another question.
How many more?
One.
All right.
We've lost 8 precincts. The precinct data won't reflect these changes. How is this adjusted in this study?
We lost 8 precincts. Who asked that question?
I did.
Can you stand up? Can you reiterate it, please? Can you reiterate the question so we
Yeah,
understand it?
Mobile County has gone from 88 to 80 precincts. So you're using precinct data for your racial polarized study. How do you adjust that precincts have been combined or whatever when you're doing this study?
So precincts often change in some measure, and that you can adjust the person doing the analysis, the racially polarized voting analysis can adjust for that by essentially assigning census blocks to precincts. Usually a precinct will be made up of a few census blocks, and so if the precinct lines change, you can look back at the past precincts and where the census blocks were then, and then adjust how the census block would move, and that we would adjust for the changes.
Thank you.
All right, one thing I didn't do, Jim, go ahead.
just, I was curious if Southern Poverty Law applied the Jingles test to the mayor's map.
So I'll refer you back to that February letter that we wrote, and it's Jingles was guiding our analysis in that letter, and it's the analysis under Jingles that's given us some concerns about the mayor's maps compliance with section 2.
Yeah, I mean, just to go further, I don't know if there's a great debate. Maybe you would debate that the 3 Jingles preconditions are met. I think like we said, the recent Milligan court case said voting is intensely racially polarized in Alabama. I think that black voters vote politically cohesively, that white voters tend to vote as a block to deny black voters their candidates of choice are not really seriously in dispute. I think it's not in dispute that it's certainly at least possible to draw for majority black districts, and that's part of the test of the Jingles 1. The first precondition is whether it's possible to map it, and then you get into the analysis of whether equal opportunity is denied, and I think that's where we get into the need for the racial polarization study, the need to assess, does this district that you're drawing, which meets all the Jingles preconditions, does this district perform for black voters, or does it not? And if you don't have the analysis, the racially polarized voting analysis, and be able to have a proper estimate as close as you can as to how that district will perform for black voters, then it's impossible to say if black voters have an equal opportunity across the map in general. And
So it gets a little difficult to get a straight answer out of an attorney, but the District 7, as it exists in 2.8, with over 50% black voting age population, is it your position that a white voting block voting cohesively as a white voting block could
And
stop a preferred
I'm
black
gonna
candidate?
file that we're not in a court, and we're not cross-examining anybody. I
So-
appreciate the banner back and forth. Let's get each other's numbers, because I think, I do know that the administration would like to satisfy everybody in going forward and helping everybody get to the right percentage. What I didn't do today was clarify for the record in attendance today was the Administrative Services Committee. Jenna Gregory. Missing is Scott Jones. Other council members in attendance or Council President C.J. Small, Corey Penn, and Ben Reynolds. The council attorneys here, the city clerk and staff, along with the chief of staff, Jen Barber, and the public safety director from the mayor's office, and various other people in the gallery. Also in attendance today, a special guest was members of the Southern Poverty Law Center to discuss the maps that were drawn in order to help find some consensus in districts 1 through 7 and find to represent the racial demographic makeup of the city of Mobile. I would like to thank all of you for your time and your effort in being here today. As I've said going through this, if we're all moving in the same direction, there's no telling what we can accomplish. Hopefully we can get everybody moving in the same direction before June 21st or August 12th, or however this is gonna happen. Going forward, I ask that we continue to do what each and every one of us thinks best for the city of Mobile and for all of our districts. Once again, thank you for being here. I'd like to call for a motion to adjourn if there's no other business that should come before this committee at this time.
May I just ask a procedural question? It's not about what's happening, it's just, can we use this room for the SPLC to stay and talk to those of us? Will this room be free for us to ask them some questions ourselves?
Lisa, yes.
Yeah.
The clerk says
Would y'all be
yes.
willing to do that?
So they can stay here, we can leave
Right.
everything in place for everybody that likes to stay here. Anything or have any additional conversations about the maps that's presented and any other things. But as of right now, I declare this meeting of the Administrative Services Committee